On August 12, 1849, in what was supposed to be just another routine auction in Charleston, South Carolina, a transaction took place that would quietly alter the course of American history. Among the dozens of souls put up for sale that day stood a small child, no more than 7 years old, silent, terrified, clutching something tightly against his chest. He was sold for $3. $3, the price of 2 bushels of rice. Yet that small, trembling child would go on to influence the future of the United States in ways no one present that morning could have possibly imagined. His life would intersect with the highest offices of government during the Civil War, reshape how a nation remembered its own past, and uncover secrets that some of America's most powerful families had spent generations trying to hide. But his name was erased, his existence deliberately obscured. For nearly a century, his story lay buried beneath silence and shame until historians piece by piece began uncovering the truth. The question isn't whether that 7-year-old changed America. The evidence leaves no doubt. The real mystery is how a child sold for $3 could transform the destiny of an entire nation. Before we return to the story of this forgotten child, the one who rewrote history from the shadows, if you're listening from anywhere in the South or anywhere across America, leave a comment and tell us where you're from. What comes next will challenge everything you thought you knew about this era of American history. Now, let's go back to that August morning in Charleston, 1849, to the moment when everything began. The harbor bristled with merchant ships carrying cotton, rice, and indigo to distant ports, their sails bright against the humid southern sky. Grand mansions lined the Battery, their piazzas catching the sea breeze, while just blocks away, the slave markets operated with the efficiency of any other commercial enterprise. The city's prosperity depended entirely on the labor of enslaved people, yet the white residents spoke of honor, heritage, and gentility as if these virtues could exist separately from the system that enriched them. The auction house on Charleston Street was unremarkable, a 2-story brick building with barred windows and a courtyard where people were displayed like livestock before being sold. Samuel Rutland, the auctioneer, had operated the business for 15 years. He prided himself on maintaining detailed records, noting not just names and prices, but also skills, physical characteristics, and any distinguishing features that might affect value. His ledgers were meticulous, each entry written in his careful hand. On that August morning, the heat was oppressive, the kind of heat that made clothing stick to skin and turned the air thick as soup. Rutland had 12 people to sell that day, ranging in age from 14 to 45. Most were field hands from a plantation in the low country that had fallen into debt. Standard merchandise, he called them in his private notes. The child arrived separately, brought in by a trader named Harrison Vance, who worked the coastal routes between Savannah and Charleston. Vance was known for finding unusual cases, people with specialized skills, those who could read or had training, and craft that commanded higher prices. But this child was different. Vance seemed almost eager to be rid of him. Found him in Savannah, Vance told Rutland, mopping sweat from his forehead. Portuguese ship captain had him. Said the boy's mother died aboard. Fever took her 3 days out from wherever they came from. Captain was going to throw the child overboard, but someone paid him to bring the boy to shore. Don't know who. Don't much care. Just want him sold and gone. The child stood in the corner of Rutland's office, silent and watchful. His skin was darker than most of the enslaved people who passed through Charleston, suggesting origins far from the American South. He was small for his age, thin from poor feeding, with eyes that seemed to absorb everything without revealing anything. He wore clothes that were too large, clearly cast-offs from an adult, and he clutched a small leather journal against his chest, like it was the only thing tethering him to earth. "What's with the book?" Ruled asked. "Don't know. Won't let go of it. Some kind of foreign writing inside." Showed it to a merchant who knows languages. He said it might be Arabic, but he wasn't sure. "Could be valuable if you find the right buyer." Could be worthless. Either way, the boy stays silent. Haven't heard him speak a word since Savannah. Rutland examined the child more carefully. The silence was unusual, but not unheard of. Trauma could steal a person's voice, especially a child's. The journal was curious, though. Books were dangerous in the hands of the enslaved. Literacy was prohibited by law. Yet this child held the journal with a possessiveness that suggested it meant something profound to him. "How much are you asking?" Rutland inquired. "Whatever you can get. Give me $5 now and we'll call it even. He's more trouble than he's worth to me." Rutland agreed. $5 was nothing for the potential profit if the right buyer came along. Someone wealthy, perhaps looking for an exotic servant or a scholar curious about the foreign writing. He entered the child into his ledger with minimal detail. Male child, approximately 7 years, origin unknown. Mute. He arrived with personal effects, including one journal. The auction began at 10:00 in the morning. The courtyard filled with buyers, plantation owners, overseers, merchants seeking domestic servants. The sales proceeded with grim efficiency. By noon, 11 people had been sold. The child was last. Rutland expected little interest. The boy was too young for heavy labor. His silence and foreign appearance might be seen as defects, and his attachment to the journal would seem odd to practical buyers. But when the child was brought forward, something unexpected happened. A man stepped forward from the back of the crowd, a man Rutland had never seen before. He was tall, dressed in dark clothing despite the heat, with a face that seemed carved from stone. His accent when he spoke was distinctly northern, possibly Massachusetts or Connecticut. In Charleston, in 1849, northern buyers were rare and often viewed with suspicion. "I'll give you $3 for the child," the man said. His voice carried across the courtyard with unnatural clarity. $3? It was insultingly low. Rutland was about to refuse when the stranger added, "And I'll take the journal with him." Something in the way he said it made Rutland pause. This man knew about the journal. More than that, he wanted the journal specifically. The child was secondary. The journal's worth more than $3 on its own. Rutland counted, sensing an opportune. "The journal is worthless to you because you can't read it." The stranger replied, $3 for both. "And I'm being generous," Routledge considered. He had $12 invested in the child, counting what he'd paid Vance and the cost of feeding and housing him for a week. $3 was a loss, but something about this stranger made him want to close the deal quickly. There was an intensity in the man's eyes that was unsettling, a sense that refusal might lead to complications. Rutland didn't want to explore. "Done," Rutland said, and the transaction was recorded. The stranger paid in silver coins, took the child's hand, and left without giving his name. Rutland watched them disappear into the crowded streets of Charleston, and a cold sensation crept down his spine, despite the suffocating heat. He'd conducted thousands of sales in his career, but this one felt wrong in a way he couldn't articulate. That night, he went home to his comfortable house on Trad Street, poured himself a generous measure of whiskey, and tried to forget the child's watchful eyes. He didn't record the buyer's name in his ledger. Later, when investigators asked why, Rutland would claim he'd simply forgotten an uncharacteristic lapse for a man known for his meticulous records. But the truth, which he'd never admit publicly, was that he couldn't remember the stranger's face clearly, even hours after the sale. It was as if the man's features refused to fix themselves in memory. The child and the stranger left Charleston that same afternoon on a coastal steamer, heading north. No passenger manifest from that voyage survives, though the ship's log confirms the vessel departed on schedule. The steamer made stops in Wilmington, Norfolk, and Baltimore before continuing to Philadelphia. Somewhere along that route, the child and the stranger disembarked. Where exactly and what transpired during that journey would remain unknown for over a decade. What is known is this. In September 1849, A child matching the boy's description appeared at a Quaker school in rural Pennsylvania near the town of Lancaster. The school, run by a woman named Patient Hadley, provided education to free black children and secretly to escaped slaves moving through the Underground Railroad. Patience kept no official records. To do so would have endangered everyone involved, but she wrote extensive personal diaries that survived in her family's possession. In her diary entry for September 18th, 1849, Patience wrote, "A child has come to us, brought by a man who would not give his name. The boy does not speak, but his eyes show intelligence and deep sorrow. He carries a book written in strange letters that none of us can decipher. The man who brought him said only that the child must be taught to read and write English, and that under no circumstances should the book be taken from him. He left $50 in gold for the child's care, far more than necessary, and departed before I could ask questions. I have the unsettling feeling that we've become guardians of something far more significant than an orphan child." The child remained at the school for 4 years. During that time, he learned to speak and write English with remarkable speed, though he never revealed his name or origin. The other students called him Book because of his constant companion. The journal he refused to let anyone read. Patience noted his progress in her diary, his aptitude for mathematics, his ability to memorize long passages of text after a single reading, his habit of waking before dawn to practice writing by candlelight. But she also noted something troubling. Every few months, a different stranger would appear at the school asking about new students, specifically inquiring about any children who'd arrived with unusual possessions. Patience always claimed ignorance, but the pattern disturbed her. Someone was searching for the child. Multiple someones, in fact, working independently of each other. In May 1853, when the child was approximately 11 years old, Patience made a decision that would alter the course of his life. A traveling scholar had come through Lancaster. A man named Dr. Lancaster, a man named Dr. True, Edwin Hartwell, who specialized in ancient languages and worked for a private library in Philadelphia. Patience showed him the journal, hoping he might identify the language and perhaps helped the child understand what his mother had left him. Dr. Hartwell examined the journal for 3 hours. When he finally looked up, his face had gone pale. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It belongs to one of my students. Why can you read it?" "I can read portions of it," Hartwell said carefully. "It's written in Arabic, but an archaic form mixed with symbols I've only seen in very old texts from North Africa. Mrs. Hadley, this journal, it contains information that many people would consider dangerous. Historical records of events that certain powerful families would prefer remain forgotten." "What kind of events?" Hartwell closed the journal and handed it back to her. "The less you know, the safer you'll be. But I can tell you this, the child carrying this journal is in danger. If the wrong people discover what's written here, they'll do anything to obtain it. They'll kill for it." Patience felt ice spread through her veins. "What should I do?" "Teach him to be invisible," Hartwell said. "And for God's sake, teach him never to show that journal to anyone." Hartwell left that same day, and Patience never saw him again. But his warning proved prescient. 2 weeks later, in the middle of the night, 3 men broke into the school. Hay ransacked the building, searching every room, questioning the children roughly about a boy with a foreign book. Patience and the older students drove them off with hunting rifles. But the message was clear. The child was no longer safe in Pennsylvania. Using contacts in the Underground Railroad, Patience arranged for the boy to travel north into New York State to a community of free black families near Albany. She gave him what money she could spare and a letter of introduction to a family named Thatcher, who would take him in. The night before he left, she asked him one question she'd never dared ask before. "Child, do you know what's written in that journal?" The boy, no longer quite a child, but not yet a youth, looked at her with eyes that seemed far older than his years. "My mother told me," he said quietly. It was the first time Patience had heard him mention his mother directly. She said it's the truth about where we came from and where we were going. She said powerful men stole our history and wrote lies to replace it. She said this journal proves their lies and that's why they want it destroyed. What history? Our history, the boy said. African history. The history they don't want anyone to know because it shows that what they do to us, what they did to my mother, is built on theft and murder going back hundreds of years. The journal has names, places, transaction, sproof. Patience felt the weight of that knowledge settle onto her shoulders. And you've kept me safe all these years. It's all I have of her, the boy said simply. And it's the truth that matters. He left the next morning. Patience never saw him again, but his words haunted her for the rest of her life. For years later, when she was an old woman watching the country tear itself apart in civil war, she would wonder if that child in his journal had somehow played a part in the great reckoning that came. She would wonder, but she would never know for certain. The boy arrived in Albany in June 1853 and was taken in by Marcus and Judith Thatcher, who ran a cooper, a workshop producing barrels for merchant trade. Marcus was a free black man who'd purchased his freedom 20 years earlier. Judith had been born free in New York. They had no children of their own and welcomed the boy into their home, asking no questions about his past. The boy, who finally chose a name for himself, Thomas Freeman, symbolizing both freedom and a fresh beginning, proved valuable to the cooperage. He had clever hands and a mind for mathematics that allowed him to calculate volumes and measurements faster than Marcus could with his traditional methods. The business prospered, but Thomas never forgot Dr. Hartwell's warning, or the men who'd ransacked Patience Hadley's school. He kept the journal hidden in a school. He kept the journal hidden in a waterproof oil-skinned pouch, buried beneath the cooper's floor. He told no one about it, not even the Thatchers, who treated him like a son. Albany in the 1850 seconds was a city of intense political activity. The debate over slavery consumed the nation, and New York was divided between those who supported abolition and those with economic ties to the South. The Underground Railroad ran through the city, and both sides watched carefully for any advantage. Thomas listened to the debates in the streets and read newspapers whenever he could. He understood that the country was moving toward catastrophe, and he understood why the system his mother had died in, the system that had nearly destroyed him, was unsustainable. It would either be dismantled or it would tear the nation apart. In 1857, the Supreme Court issued its decision in the Dred Scott case, declaring that black people could never be citizens. Thomas was 14 years old when he heard the news. That night, for the first time in years, he took out his mother's journal and read it again by candlelight. The journal was organized in sections, some written by his mother, others apparently copied from older sources she'd had access to. The earliest entries dated back to the 1700s and documented transactions between European traders and African merchants. Transactions that had been systematically misrepresented in official records. To justify the slave trade, his mother had somehow obtained access to ledgers, letters, and bills of sale that showed the deliberate manipulation of documentation to transform legitimate prisoners of war and criminals into supposedly permanent cattle. But there was more. Tucked into the later pages were Andy names, American names, families in Charleston, Richmond, Savannah, and New Orleans who'd built their fortunes on the slave trade and who'd gone to extraordinary lengths to conceal certain aspects of their involvement. His mother had listed dates of specific crimes, murders made to look like accidents, documents forged to claim ownership of free people, conspiracies to capture and sell free black children. Thomas realized his mother must have worked in a household with access to private papers, perhaps as a domestic servant for a merchant or trader. She'd copied these records secretly over years, documenting evidence that could destroy powerful families if it ever became public. No wonder people were hunting for the journal. It wasn't just historical record. It was a weapon. Thomas made a decision that night. He would wait. He would keep the journal safe until the moment was right, until the country was ready to hear what it contained. He was young, but he was patient. He could afford to wait. The years passed. Thomas grew into a young man. The Thatcher's cooperage continued to prosper, and Thomas became Marcus's full partner. He saved money carefully, invested wisely, and by 1860, at 17 years old, he owned a small house of his own. He'd learnt to read and write fluently in English, and he taught himself mathematics advanced enough to handle complex accounting. To anyone who knew him, he was simply a successful young craftsman and businessman. But beneath that surface, Thomas was preparing. He corresponded with former students from Patience Hadley School who'd scattered across the North. He made contacts with abolitionists and journalists. He carefully researched the families named in his mother's journal, confirming that they still existed and still held power. And then, in April 1861, Confederate forces fired on Fort Sumter, and the nation erupted into war. The Civil War transformed everything. In Albany, young men enlisted in Union regiments with patriotic fervor. The Cooper's business shifted to producing containers for military supplies, gunpowder kegs, food barrels, water casks. Thomas was exempt from military service because his work was considered essential to the war effort. But he watched friends and neighbors march south, many never to return. In the chaos of war, information became currency. Both sides needed intelligence about the enemy's resources, leadership, and weaknesses. The Union government established networks of spies and informers throughout the South, while Confederate agents worked in northern cities to gather information and sabotage Union efforts. In November 1862, a man appeared at Thomas's door. He introduced himself as Colonel Isaac Brennan, working for the War Department in Washington. Brennan was looking for information about Southern families, their finances, their business dealings, anything that might reveal Confederate supply networks or hidden assets. "I've heard you might have access to historical records about certain Charleston families," Brennan said carefully, watching Thomas's face. "Records that could prove useful to the Union cause." Thomas's blood ran cold. How had this man learned about the journal? Had someone from his past talked, or was this simply luck or tragedy, that the one secret he'd guarded so carefully had been discovered at the worst possible moment? "I don't know what you're talking about," Thomas said. Brennan smiled, but there was no warmth in it, "Mr. Freeman. I don't think you understand the situation. We're at war. The president has suspended habeas corpus. I could have you arrested right now and search your property without a warrant, but I'd rather we work together. The information you have could help us end this war faster. It could save thousands of lives. Who told you about me? That's not relevant. What's relevant is that journal you've been hiding since you were 7 years old. The journal your mother died protecting. Don't you think she'd want it used to destroy the system that killed her?" Thomas felt trapped. Everything Brennan said was true. His mother had wanted the journal to be revealed, but timing mattered. If the journal was revealed too soon or in the wrong way, it might cause more harm than good. The families named in it were powerful. They had connections in government, in banking, in the military itself. Expose them recklessly, and they'd find ways to bury the evidence and destroy anyone associated with it. "I need time to think," Thomas said. "You don't have time," Brennan replied. "But I'll give you 3 days. After that, I'll return with a warrant and soldiers." Brennan left. Thomas stood in his empty house, feeling the weight of 15 years of secrecy pressing down on him. That night, he retrieved the journal from its hiding place and sat at his kitchen table, reading by lamplight until dawn. His mother's handwriting filled the pages, small and careful, each entry a testament to her courage and determination to document truth, despite tremendous danger. One passage struck him with particular force. His mother had written, "They believe we are nothing. They believe we have no history worth remembering, no records worth preserving. They believe they can erase us from human memory. This journal is proof they're wrong. Whoever reads is my son. If you survive, or anyone else who finds it, use this knowledge wisely. Truth is a weapon, but weapons can wound the wielder. Choose your moment carefully. Choose your moment carefully. Choose your moment carefully. His mother had known the journal's power and its danger. Thomas made his decision. He would give Brennan the journal, but not the original. Over the next 2 days, working through night and day, Thomas created a careful copy of the journal, transcribing every entry into a new ledger in his own handwriting. He translated the Arabic sections into English, making the information accessible to American readers. He verified the names and dates against newspapers and public records where possible, adding footnotes with supporting evidence. The result was a document that stood on its own, independent of the mysterious original. A document that could be verified, challenged, and debated, not a religious text or ancient artifact, but a historical record supported by contemporary sources. When Brennan returned on the 3rd day, Thomas gave him the transcript along with copies of the supporting documents he'd compiled. "Where's the original?" Brennan demanded. "Safe," Thomas said. "If you want the information, that transcript contains everything you need. Names, dates, transactions, all documented, all verifiable. Use it however you think best for the Union cause." Brennan examined the transcript. Carefully, this could embarrass some very important people. Some of these families still have influence in Washington. "Then perhaps that influence needs to be challenged," Thomas said quietly. Brennan looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Perhaps it does. Thank you, Mr. Freeman. You've done your country a service." He left with the transcript. Thomas watched him disappear down the street, feeling both relief and apprehension. He'd given away his mother's secret, the burden he'd carried since childhood, but he'd done it on his own terms, in his own way. The original journal remained hidden, safe for future generations if needed. The information within it was now in the hands of people who could use it. Whether they would use it wisely remained to be seen. For 3 months, Thomas heard nothing. The war continued its brutal course. Battles raged across Virginia and Tennessee, and casualty lists filled newspaper pages. The transcript he'd given Brennan seemed to have disappeared into the bureaucracy of wartime Washington. Then in February 1863, strange things began to happen. A fire broke out in the warehouse next to Thomas's cupboard. Not a large fire, easily controlled, but suspicious in its timing and location. An investigation suggested arson, though no perpetrator was ever identified. A week later, Thomas noticed he was being followed. Different men at different times, always keeping their distance, but always there. When he confronted one of them, the man claimed to be a federal marshal, investigating Confederate sympathizers. When Thomas demanded to see credentials, the man disappeared into a crowd. Letters Thomas sent to friends in other cities went missing. Letters sent to him arrived, opened, clearly read by someone before delivery. His business began to suffer as longtime customers suddenly cancelled orders without explanation. Marcus Thatcher, now in his 62nds, noticed the changes and confronted Thomas. "What have you gotten yourself into, son?" Thomas told him everything. The journal, the sale in Charleston, the years in hiding, the transcript given to Colonel Brennan. Marcus listened without interruption, his weathered face growing more concerned with each revelation. "You poked a hornet's nest," Marcus said, when Thomas finished. "These powerful families you've documented, they're not going to let themselves be exposed without a fight. War or no war, they have resources, they have connections, and they're clearly trying to frighten you. What should I do?" "Leave Albany tonight if possible. Go somewhere they can't find you easily. I have a cousin in Michigan owns a lumber mill near Saginaw. No one would think to look for you there. You can work, stay safe, and wait for this storm to pass." Thomas resisted at first. Running felt Ike's surrender, like abandoning the cause his mother had died for. But Marcus was insistent, and Judith supported him. That evening, Thomas packed his essentials, including the original journal wrapped in oil, skin, and leather, and left Albany on the night train to Buffalo. He never saw the Thatchers again. 3 weeks after his departure, the cupboard burned to the ground in a fire that killed Marcus and seriously injured Judith. The official report called it an accident, a lantern knocked over in the workshop. But Thomas knew better. They'd been targeted because of him. Because of what he'd set in motion by giving that transcript to Brennan. The guilt was crushing. Thomas spent the spring of 1863 working in Michigan lumber camps, trying to outrun both his pursuers and his conscience. He sent money to Judith for her medical care, but she died in June, her injuries having never healed properly. Thomas felt responsible for both deaths, and the weight of that responsibility nearly destroyed him. But in July, something happened that changed everything. The Battle of Gettysburg ended in Union victory, and suddenly the war's momentum shifted. More importantly, Thomas received a letter forwarded through multiple addresses to maintain secrecy from an unlikely source. The letter was from a journalist named Harriet Weston, who worked for an abolitionist newspaper in Boston. She'd received portions of Thomas's transcript through channels she couldn't reveal. She'd verified many of the claims through her own research. She was preparing a series of articles exposing the historical crimes documented in the transcript, but she needed Thomas's help to confirm certain details and, if possible, to view the original journal to ensure accuracy. The country is changing. Harriet wrote, "President Lincoln has issued the Emancipation Proclamation. The question of slavery is no longer political. It's moral. Your mother's documentation could help ensure that when this war ends, the truth about how this system was built cannot be denied or forgotten. Please contact me. Let's finish what she started." Thomas read the letter 3 times. Here was the opportunity he'd been waiting for, a way to ensure his mother's work would be recognized, that her sacrifice would mean something. But accepting meant coming out of hiding, making himself a target again. He thought about Marcus and Judith, about Patience Hadley, about his mother whose name he'd never known, whose face he could barely remember. They'd all risked everything for truth and freedom. How could he do less? Thomas wrote back to Harriet Weston, agreeing to meet. But before he revealed himself, he needed to take one more precaution. He traveled to Detroit and placed the original journal in a bank vault with instructions that it all'd only be released to specific individuals, Harriet Weston, or if she was unavailable, to the offices of the abolitionist newspaper, or failing that, to the Library of Congress. If he died or disappeared, the journal would eventually be made public. The truth would survive even if he didn't. Only then did Thomas travel to Boston to meet Harriet Weston and begin the work of transforming his mother's documentation into a weapon against the system that had enslaved them both. Just when the weight of Thomas's journey seemed almost too heavy to bear alone, Harriet Weston proved to be more than just a journalist seeking a story. If this account of one child's burden carrying the truth through a country tearing itself apart moves you, share this tale with someone who values hidden histories. Hit that like button if you believe some truths are worth any sacrifice, and subscribe to discover how this unlikely partnership would finally bring those buried secrets into the light. Let's continue with what happened when these two determined souls joined forces in the summer of 1863. Harriet Weston was 42 years old when she met Thomas Freeman in Boston in August 1863. She'd been writing for abolitionist newspapers since the 1842, documenting the realities of slavery through interviews with escaped slaves and free black communities. She'd seen her articles censored, her office ransacked, and her life threatened. But she'd never stopped writing because she believed that words properly deployed could change the world. When Thomas entered her office on Tamont Street, Harriet saw immediately what the boy purchased for $3 had become, a young man of 20, careful and watchful, carrying burdens far too heavy for someone his age. But she also saw determination and a quiet strength that reminded her of the best people she'd encountered in her decades of activism. "Tell me everything," she said, and Thomas did. The telling took hours. Harriet listened without interruption, as Thomas described the auction house, the silent years, the schools and safe houses, the journal he'd protected through it all. When he finished, she sat back in her chair and studied him carefully. "Do you understand what you're offering me?" she asked. "This isn't just a story. This is evidence that could destroy powerful families. It could make you a target for the rest of your life." "I've been a target since I was 7 years old," Thomas replied quietly. "The difference now is that I'm old enough to fight back." Harriet nodded slowly. "Then we'll fight together, but we do this properly. Every claim verified, every name checked, every date confirmed. We give them no opening to dismiss this as fantasy or fabrication." They worked together for 3 months, and the process was painstaking. Harriet had contacts throughout New England, archivists, historians, clerks, and government offices who shared her abolitionist sympathies. She sent letters to archives in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and New York, requesting copies of ship manifests, property deeds, and bills of sale from the early 1700s. Thomas worked alongside her, translating sections of the journal and cross-referencing his mother's entries with the documents Harriet obtained. What emerged was more detailed and more damning than either had anticipated. The journal didn't just document individual crimes, it revealed systematic patterns. The same families appeared repeatedly across decades. Their business relationships intertwined, their legal manipulations coordinated. They'd created what amounted to a conspiracy spanning generations, each new generation inheriting not just wealth, but the methods and connections necessary to maintain the fiction that their system was legitimate. One case consumed weeks of research. In 1731, a Charleston merchant named William Creswell had purchased a group of survivors from a slave ship that had wrecked during a storm. Among the survivors was a man named Kofi, who carried papers proving he was a merchant from the Gold Coast traveling on legitimate business. Rather than honor these documents, Creswell had them destroyed and sold Kofi as a slave. When Kofi's business partners in Lund sent inquiries, Creswell claimed the entire ship had been lost with no survivors. Thomas's mother had documented this in extraordinary detail, including transcriptions of letters between Creswell and other merchants, discussing how to handle complications when educated Africans arrived with documentations of their free status. The letters revealed a deliberate strategy: destroy the papers, isolate the individuals, sell them quickly to inland plantations where they'd have no access to ports or legal assistance, and maintain plausible deniability if questioned. Harriet traced Creswell's descendants. The family still existed in 1863, now prominent in South Carolina banking and politics. One of William Creswell's great-great-grandsons was serving as a Confederate officer. The wealth that financed his education and position traced directly back to his ancestors' fraud. "This is what we need," Harriet said, studying the documentation spread across her desk. Not just historical crimes, but direct lines connecting past fraud to present power. Show people that this isn't ancient history. It's the foundation their contemporary world is built on. By October, they had compiled enough material for a series of 5 articles. Harriet's editor at the newspaper, a cautious man named Edmund Pierce, read the first draft and went pale. "Harriet, these are serious accusations against families with considerable influence. Some have relatives in Congress. Are you absolutely certain of your sources?" "Every fact has been verified," Harriet assured him. "Every name, every date, every transaction." Thomas's mother didn't document rumors. She documented crimes she had direct evidence of. "And if they sue us, then we'll produce the evidence in court. That might be the best outcome. A public forum to present everything we've found." Pice struggled with the decision for a week before finally agreeing to publish. The first article appeared on October 15th, 1863, under the headline "Foundations of Fraud: How America's Slave System Was Built on Systematic Deception." The response was immediate and violent. Within days, Harriet received threatening letters promising arson, assault, and murder. Someone threw a brick through her office window with a note attached: "Lies have consequences." 2 men attempted to force their way into her apartment. Only the intervention of neighbors who heard her screams prevented worse. Thomas faced similar harassment. Men followed him openly now, not bothering to hide their surveillance. His landlady, frightened by the attention, asked him to leave. He moved 3 times in 2 weeks, each time finding new lodgings, only to be forced out again when his pursuers located him. But the articles also found defenders. Abolitionist societies throughout New England reprint them. Ministers cited them in sermons. Frederick Douglass himself wrote a response praising the documentation and calling for further investigation into the historical crimes revealed. The controversy grew so intense that it reached Washington. In November, Harriet received word that a congressional committee wanted to examine the evidence. Some committee members were genuinely interested in historical truth. Others wanted to discredit the articles and protect the families being accused. The summons arrived for Thomas in December. He was to appear before the Joint Committee on the Conduct of the War in January 1864, bringing whatever documentation he claimed supported his allegations. Thomas prepared carefully. He brought the transcript, now extensively annotated with supporting documents. He carried copies of ship manifests, property deeds, and court records that Harriet had carefully gathered over the years. But he did not bring the original journal. That priceless book remained locked inside a bank vault in Detroit, secured under strict legal arrangements that would automatically make it public if anything happened to him. The journey to Washington lasted 2 long days. Thomas traveled alongside Harriet and Edmund Pierce, who had agreed to serve as a witness to the verification process they had completed together. When they arrived on January 10th, 1864, they found a capital city transformed by war. Soldiers crowded the streets. Hospitals were overflowing with wounded men. The air itself felt heavy with tension and military urgency. The hearing was held in a committee room inside the Capitol building. 13 congressmen and senators sat in judgment. Some faces showed sympathy. Others displayed open hostility. The gallery seats were packed with journalists, abolitionists, and representatives of the accused families. Everyone waited in silence, eager to see how the testimony would unfold. Thomas stood before them and told his story. For 2 hours he spoke about the auction in Charleston. He described the journal his mother had risked her life to protect. He explained the careful verification process he and Harriet had conducted. He answered detailed questions about specific entries, about his mother's possible sources, and about how a domestic servant could have gained access to the private papers of powerful merchants and traders. "My mother worked in households involved in this trade," Thomas explained calmly. "Over many years, she copied documents whenever opportunity allowed. She understood the danger. She accepted the risk because she believed the truth mattered more than her own safety." 47 children, Thaddeus Stevens of Pennsylvania, the committee's most radical abolitionist, leaned forward and pressed him for even deeper details. If you want to hear what happened next, how the room reacted and how the room reacted, and how history changed that day, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you never miss the next part of this powerful story.